Always trust.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Palestinska odvjetnica za ljudska prava Diana Buttu počela je karijeru u vrijeme druge palestinske intifade kao glasnogovornica pri Palestinskoj oslobodilačkoj organizaciji. Ranih 2000-ih sudjelovala je u mirovnim pregovorima oko implementacije Sporazuma iz Osla. Hello, Diana, and welcome to the program of Al Jazeera.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
With all eyes on Gaza, there have been many developments in the occupied West Bank in the past month. Can you tell us what has been happening? And maybe just to clarify, there has been different types of events have been happening. So if you could categorize them to tell us what's been happening.
Yes, certainly. All eyes are on Gaza, as they should be, because the Israelis are carrying out a genocide over there. In the West Bank, though, the Israelis are also carrying out massive crimes. We have a number of things that the Israelis are doing. First is that Israel has killed over 170 Palestinians in the West Bank alone just since October 7th, including a number of children. Second is we see that Israeli settlers are attacking Palestinians and trying to take over their land. And also the Israeli settlers have been harming Palestinians and injuring them very, very seriously. Nobody is stopping these Israeli settlers. To the contrary, the Israeli army is allowing them to do so. Third is we've seen that the army has prevented Palestinians from even being able to get to their land in the West Bank. Things like preventing them from going to their olive groves and preventing them from moving on a daily basis. And on top of that, we've seen that the Israeli army has carried out a number of attacks inside Palestinian cities, including cities like Tulkarem, cities like Jenin, and other places, where even the street where my friend and your former colleague, Shireen Abu Akleh, where she was murdered, the Israelis ended up destroying that entire area and destroying the memorial that was laid there for her. What we're seeing is yet another process of ethnic cleansing, where Israel is taking over Palestinian land and getting rid of as many Palestinians as possible. And it doesn't stop there. We've seen them pick up thousands of Palestinian workers from the Gaza Strip, torture them, keep them in conditions that were unknown, and then eventually send them back to the Gaza Strip. And so all of this is being done under the cover of darkness, and it's very terrifying.
You say it's very terrifying. What's the sentiment among people in occupied Palestinian territories along the West Bank? There's been raids, as you said. There's been a lot of arrests. Yesterday, at the time of the filming of this interview, Ahed Tamimi, one of the most vocal young Palestinian activists, has also been arrested. What do people feel? What do people say there?
Yes, you're right. Ahed is one of 2,000 Palestinians who have been arrested since this time, many of them held without any charge, without ever having any trials. And the feeling is one that we are just, sitting ducks, so to speak, which is to say that nobody is there to protect us. The world's attention can't even get a ceasefire. They can't even get Israel to stop the attack in the Gaza Strip. So people know that it's just a matter of time before the Israeli forces come after us with incredible brutality. We've already seen it in places like Hebron, Khalil, where the Israelis are going after Palestinians there. And we see it all throughout Palestine. Nobody is here to protect us.
Diana, how are the attacks and the rising violence in the West Bank? How is Israel justifying that when at the same time it's justifying everything it's doing in Gaza simply by dealing with Hamas?
That's a wonderful question, Hanan, and I wish I had an answer. Or I wish I had a better answer. The answer is that they don't need to. nobody has pushed Israel. Nobody has asked Israel. Nobody has said anything to Israel. Just the other day, one of the Israeli ministers came out and said that the nuclear option is an option when it comes to the Gaza Strip. And a person from his same political party is the person who is talking about giving even more weapons to Israeli settlers. The Americans, on the one hand, are saying that they want to make sure that that weaponry is not being used against Palestinians, but then they're doing nothing to stop Israel's attacks on Palestinians. So nobody has been pushing Israel. Nobody's asked Israel the very question that you have asked. And instead, the world has turned a blind eye, not only to what's happening in the West Bank, but more importantly, to what's happening in the Gaza Strip.
Is what we're seeing in the Gaza Strip a retaliation for October 7?
No, this is ethnic cleansing and genocide. And I want to be clear on this. The Israeli ministers, even before October 7th, were talking about a solution, as they would put it, for the Gaza Strip. This is nothing new. They've been talking about having to get rid of the Gaza Strip for many, many years. There's a minister, the Minister of Finance, is a person who said that the only reason that Palestinians remain is because the Israelis didn't finish off the job in 1948. They didn't ethnically cleanse us in 1948. And this is before October 7th by a year. So all of this has been leading up to it. What they're doing now is they've been given the green light to carry out this ethnic cleansing and genocide. And that's why you see the ways in which the Israelis have been bombing and the Palestinian victims of Israeli bombings. We see that 42% of those who've been killed in the Gaza Strip are people who are in the so-called safe areas. So what Israel is doing is carrying out a genocide. It's carrying out ethnic cleansing. And the world is just simply watching at this point.
Many people tuning into Israeli-Palestinian conflict in the past month may not be aware of some of the events, as we mentioned some of them during our conversation, but some events that my colleagues and people like you and your colleagues have reported on. Just especially because you're speaking from the Palestine outside of Gaza Strip, the terminology there. What do terms occupation, settler colonialism, settler violence, and evictions mean for the life of the Palestinians and the deterioration of their already occupied state?
So, Hanan, occupation is violent. To live under occupation means to live under daily violence. What does that mean? It means that we are not free, that we don't have the ability to determine our future, to determine the affairs of our own lives, that somebody else is ruling over us. It means that for a mother, she doesn't know if her children are going to be arrested on a daily basis for anything ranging from carrying a flag to a post on social media, to attending a rally, to you name it. It means that we don't have the ability to determine our future in terms of where it is that we're going to live. It means that a Palestinian from the West Bank who may have family members in the Gaza Strip can't see their family. It means that that people from the Gaza Strip, they dream of being able to visit their friends and their family in all parts of Palestine. That's what Israeli occupation is about. It's about crushing Palestinians and ruling over their lives. Now, at the same time, Israel isn't just occupying us, they're colonizing us. They've stolen Palestinian land from Palestinians. They've kicked them off of that land, and in their place, they've put Israeli settlers. Now, Israeli settlers don't just come and live there, they come and live there with the army, which means that there are now checkpoints in place, which means that there are roads that are off limits to Palestinians. That's what settler colonialism is. There's a system of superior rights for people who are Jewish and inferior rights for people who are Palestinian. We live under separate rules. There's even a separate court system in place for Palestinians versus Israelis. So a person charged with the same crimes The Israeli will go under a different court system than the Palestinians. They'll receive a different sentence, if they're ever sentenced, than the Palestinians are. And so every day is to live under violence. And what pains me is that the world and history did not begin on October 7th of 2023. We as Palestinians have been living under a very brutal regime now since 1948. And to dismiss all of Israel's actions and to somehow start the clock of history on October 7th is, Hanan, the height of dehumanization. It is the height of it. It's to somehow say that Palestinian abuse should be normalized, that the violations of our human rights are normal and should be just excused, but they shouldn't be excused. We are also humans, and to have to constantly be explaining to people that we deserve our freedom, again, is to feed into the system of dehumanization. You know, Hanan, today as we're speaking, there are over 10,000 Palestinians who've been killed by Israel just in the Gaza Strip alone in the course of 1 month. More than 2,000 people remain under the rubble. Almost half of those people are children under the age of 18. These are children who've never seen a day of freedom in their lives, who, if they're anything over than 13 years of age, they've lived through 5 wars. This is not a life for them. And it's up to the world community to finally bring this to an end. But instead, they're fueling it and funding it and giving Israel a green light.
In the grim setup that you just gave, but let's talk about once this ends, however it ends. You were also involved in political processes in Palestine over the years. You had also called out problems within Palestinian political representation. With the, on one hand, physical division of Palestinian state, and on the other side, political division between Hamas and Fatah, and also with everything that's happening at the moment. Some experts say that there is that what's missing is a relevant Palestinian movement, a political movement. How do you see the political situation, and who is supposed to lead or organize Palestinians?
There is no absence of a Palestinian political movement. We have so many political parties. We have a thriving Palestinian political movement. There are divisions, definitely. But ultimately, it's up to Palestinians to decide. My fear right now is that the world is trying to handpick a leader that will somehow be placed in the Gaza Strip and will rule over the Gaza Strip. This is not us. We are the essence, the core of our struggle of self-determination is for us to choose who our leaders are, not for the world to choose our leaders. And herein lies the problem. No matter how many people they try to put forward or what solutions they try to put forward, it's got to be that Palestinians are the ones who decide, not the Americans, not the Israelis. Palestinians must be the ones who choose their leaders and who decide who's going to rule over us. And that is the core of self-determination. I think that if there's one lesson that we must learn from this very brutal attack on the Gaza Strip, the virtual destruction of the Gaza Strip, is that the old way doesn't work any longer. It's no longer that Israel gets to choose or that Israel's so-called security needs are put ahead of Palestinian needs. We must start placing Palestinian rights first, not second. And that's where the world must start focusing its attention. If anything, this has shown that placing Palestinians in a cage, as Israel did for the past 18 years, only is going to breed violence. And if they're so concerned with the violence, they will get rid of the conditions that created violence, rather than try to make even more conditions that will breed even more violence.
Thank you for this analysis. I was also wondering, you were part of the teams, negotiation teams during the Oslo Accords and implementation of Oslo. And yes. Oslo is also disputed by many in terms of, you know, what was arranged and what was implemented in the end. And as much as many hoped that Oslo would, after both intifadas, finally bring some kind of a solution, it hasn't. So could you maybe explain a little bit where is the failure of Oslo in that sense, which is basically the over 20 years ago and the last existing solution given to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Actually, it was 30 years ago. It was in September of 1993. And what Oslo was it was supposed to be a system in which the two sides negotiated with one another, and it would lead to Palestinian freedom. Where did it go wrong? From the beginning. The idea that Palestinians have to negotiate their freedom is reprehensible. Palestinians and all people around the world should be born free, not have to negotiate their freedom. But the second problem was that even if you get over that reprehensible idea, and it is reprehensible, nobody in the world community stood forward and said to Israel, enough is enough. Remember, I just explained to you that occupation is violent, and occupation is one way. It's Israel occupying us, not the other way around, which means that Israel has the tools and the ability to end it. All it needs to do is take a decision that it's going to leave the West Bank, leave the Gaza Strip, allow Palestinians to live in freedom. That's all it takes. And it can be done as simply as putting sanctions on Israel and telling Israel to stop. But Israel's never wanted to do that. And instead, it spent the past 30 years deepening the occupation, building more and more Israeli settlements. We went from having 200,000 settlers in the year 1993 to now 750,000 Israeli settlers are living on Palestinian land. And throughout that period, nobody told Israel to stop. So going forward, and I think that's the most important thing, is we must learn the lessons. It's a very painful lesson that Palestinians have had to learn, and we paid a very painful price. If anything now, the world must realize that the only way forward is for international rules to remain superior. Not Israeli rules, but international rules. And this system of apartheid, where Israelis are given superior rights and Palestinians have inferior rights, has got to come to an end. Put it simply, the world must now place economic sanctions on Israel, just in the same way that the world placed economic sanctions on apartheid South Africa. There is no difference between what South African apartheid was about and what Israeli apartheid was about, except for one thing: it's worse in Palestine.
What we are witnessing now is, to some extent, a change in the perspective in global public opinion and how it's receiving the storytelling versus facts about what's happening in Israel and Palestine. How do you see this? Do you see a change, and what could that mean for the Palestinian question?
I really must begin by thanking your colleagues at Al Jazeera Arabic and Al Jazeera English, the two channels that I've been watching the most, because they are so far the only two channels that are showing what is happening with clarity and with moral clarity. People like Wa'il Dahdour, who is in Gaza, who has been on the front lines since day one, who paid a very heavy price with his wife and his children assassinated, and going on the air the following day. It shows you the strength and conviction and the courage that these journalists have. I have to contrast that, of course, with other journalists, where they have simply been parroting and serving as what we call stenographers for the Israeli army. They've done everything from question the number of Palestinians who've been killed, which is a form of dehumanization. They've done everything from repeat the Israeli talking points, again, another form of dehumanization, and simply approach this issue as though somehow history began on October 7th, which of course it didn't. Now, cutting through all of this, of course, we have social media. And it's been on social media where people can see the true images, the same images that Al Jazeera Arabic and Al Jazeera English have been broadcasting to the world, where we see men who've been so demonized, Palestinian men have been so demonized. We see these men trying to grab their children out of the rubble, giving them the care and the love and the support that they need. And men and Palestinians who have been devastated by the nonstop bombing campaign. This is a bombing campaign that has targeted hospitals, schools, churches, mosques, universities, UN facilities, bakeries, you name it. And throughout, we've seen that on social media, these young Palestinian journalists who are showing the world what it means to live as a Palestinian, what it means to live under this bombardment campaign. And so I salute those people because they are risking their lives in order to let the world see the truth, while journalists whose job it is to tell the truth are instead serving as stenographers for the Israeli army.
How much do you think that that kind of behavior, mainly in the West, either through journalism or through just historiography and framing of things and of historical and contemporary events, how much do you think that has affected the current state, or at least the justification and legitimization that Israel gets?
Look, I think we need to contrast the world with the United States. And when we looked at the UN vote that happened not too long ago, a little over 2 weeks ago, we saw that 120 states voted in favor of a ceasefire. That's the majority of the world, by the way. That is the majority of the world. And when you see these demonstrations of support for Palestinians around the world, that is the world community. That is the international community. And it's these people who are moved by the images that we see Al Jazeera and these young Palestinian journalists, Mu'taz and Bisan and Polizia and others that are broadcasting to the world. It is, if anything, it's the social media and other media is cutting through. And that's why we see the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people who are marching in support and demanding that Israel stop. I want to contrast that, of course, with the United States, where we see that the United States still hasn't been pushing for Israel to stop, and instead is sending Israel more weaponry, and is instead sending Israel more troops as well. And I think that that is largely the result of the way that they are projecting what Israel is doing. Many of them are not trying to search beyond the Israeli talking points. Some of them are, I must say, but many of them are not. And they don't simply want to understand what this is about, and instead enjoy this idea of war reporting as though there are two equal sides. You know, the Gaza Strip is one large refugee camp. It's a refugee camp that was created with the establishment of the state of Israel. These are people who are Palestinian, who are originally from inside Palestine that Israel pushed out and turned into refugees. And so the idea that somehow this is an equal war when it's not is laughable. That's the way that many in the West have been covering this. But I am so heartened by the real work that is being done by true journalists who are trying to show the world what it is like to live as a Palestinian, what it's like to live under this bombing, what it's like to see your neighbors pulled out of rubble, what it's like to see children terrified, what it's like to go hungry, what it's like to not have fuel, what it's like to be treated as though you are people who don't matter. And that's where the real work of journalism is.
Thank you very much, Diana, for joining our program.
My pleasure.